decade, Saturdays and Illegal Curve have been synonymous with one another. With insight, analysis, and interviews regarding the Winnipeg Jets, the Manitoba Moose, and all around the NHL, here are Dave Minuk, Ezra Ginsburg, and your host, Drew Mindell. The Illegal Curve Hockey Show starts now.
Good morning, Winnipeg. Good morning, Manitoba. For all those joining us live this morning on our YouTube channel and all of our social media platforms, we say good morning, universe, and welcome to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. With Dave Minuk, with Ezra Ginsburg, I'm your host, Drew Mindell, here for the next couple of hours, talk about the Winnipeg Jets, talk about everything going on, related, adjacent, concerning the Jets in any which way, shape, or form. We'll cover it over the
We're going to talk about that shirt.
You can talk about my tie-dyed shirt if you'd want. It was a
I like it. I love tie-dye. Remember there used to be a tie-dye store in the Cordon Village Mall? Do you guys remember what I'm talking about? Anybody who lives in River Heights or frequents River Heights, remember there? Well, I mean, there wasn't just one store in River Heights, but there was a tie-dye store where you'd go and you'd get a tie-dye shirt. Love tie-dye.
You'd make your own tie-dye shirts, wasn't it? That you'd take your shirt and I think it started with an A. It was in the front of the building, if I recall correctly. And I'm a North Ender, but I remember.
I was going to say, who let you out of the North End to go to that birthday party, Dave?
When those Pollock families had birthday parties, Dave M was allowed to. My passport allowed me entry into the South End.
Fair enough. That was nice of them to give you the permission to cross the border into the South End at that point in time. But yes, I do remember vaguely what you're talking about there, Mr. Ginsburg. This is actually this was a Father's Day.
It's a nice shirt.
Thank you. It was a Father's Day.
It's not as nice as my shirt here that I'm wearing in honor of Rick Ralph. That's right.
Yeah. Are you going to burn that shirt?
I like your shirt too.
A little bit later. Thank you. It was a Father's Day.
It's a collector's item.
I'll tell you what,
something already.
If you have a t-shirt that says Sports Radio 1290, that's a collector's item. Because if you remember the live on location broadcast when the Jets came back, we were all handed out by the, I say this tongue firmly in cheek, good people at Bell Media with Sports Radio 1290 t-shirts. I think I might even still have one somewhere deep buried in a closet. I'll have to see if I can find that at some point in time and then dispose of it.
Those were the good old days, boys. Before it was TSN 1290.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. It was called Sports Radio 1290 back in the day. In any event, good morning, everybody. This t-shirt that I'm wearing was a Father's Day gift for my kids, and it's what I grabbed out of the closet without thinking any further. And then as soon as I sat down in my oh-so-comfy chair here, I knew I was going to get some sort of feedback regarding it from Mr. Ginsburg and Mr.
Well, people obviously want to know as well, Drew, does the carpet match the drapes?
It does. I'm tie-dyed everywhere. And what people don't need to see it, people won't see it, but I'm tie-dyed head to toe underneath the clothes.
I'm out.
It's just it's just a rainbow plethora underneath. But again, God help us all if that's what we're talking about.
It's better than your leopard skin undies that you usually wear, Drew.
That's a leopard skin thong, Ezzy. It's a thong. We've talked about this before. Dave's out again.
It got very dark, very, very quick this morning, right, boys?
Yeah. Well,
it's pretty dark right now, Dave.
It's something.
It's sort of funny, because you were talking about it. It's sort of like it was in that sort of gap of that month or 6 weeks between when the Jets season ended and then the cup final ended and there was all quiet. It's back to all quiet again. And I expect it to be all quiet come August. That's when the NHL basically shuts down for the month.
As do we.
As do we, of course. We shut down the Saturday show starting right the last Saturday in July. But, I'm surprised that there hasn't really been any news, any sort of anything since the draft. I know you can say development camp, but development camp was just newsworthy in the sense that you got to see these players you've never really seen before in Winnipeg. But other than that,
what are you talking about, Drew? There was breaking news yesterday. 6 Winnipeg Jets players got new numbers.
Well, when Dave is promoting that over and over again, how the dearth of content and how it's really.
Hey, actually, shockingly, people loved it. Actually, I have to say, I was surprised. I went and looked on the website. I was like, wow, did that do well? So,
well, the funniest part, Dave, is that there always has to be a number 9 on the Jets, right? Like, it's so funny with like Bobby Hull and the history of that number, and also it's one of the most iconic numbers, period, in hockey, right?
Yes, and CJ.
But yeah, it's just funny, Dave, how there's always a number 9. That's what stood out to me. I mean, some of the other numbers, I think fans like to know, what players' jersey numbers are going to be. I just think it's always funny about that number 9. That might just be me.
No, I agree with you. As I thought it was funny, and then like I said, there was what was the other one that people Lauren Brossois switching from 30 to 39. So folks will have to get a 9 instead of a 0, but it was kind of him to only make Winnipeggers have to change one number.
He knows we're always looking for a deal.
Yeah,
He's aware of our roots and our reputation. But I mean, are you guys not a little bit surprised that there hasn't been additional moves of some variety, given that, you know, even if the goaltending and Scheifele or Hellebuyck and Scheifele nothing happens with them, you know, the defense is still a big question mark. There haven't been any of we know the guys who are eligible for arbitration or who have gone and have arbitration dates in Barron and Velarde, but it's just been almost this entire week. It's just been sort of radio silence. I'm sort of surprised about that. I thought there'd still be some more shoes to drop as we get closer to the end of the month.
I'm not that surprised about it, Ty. Like, I think that I'm calling you Ty because of the tie-dye shirt, by the way, Drew.
I got it.
No, I mean, we know, guys, that this time of year is, I mean, we talked about it a couple weeks ago, right? Like, we went off air right before the free agency flurry started. I mean, it's always busy that first week, right? Between whatever, July 1st and July 5th, whatever you want to say. So I'm not that surprised. And also the Jets, you know, they made, you know, a fair amount of moves. They weren't the most active team, but they made some moves. And, you know, whether that was signing Vlad Nemesnikov, whether that was signing, pardon me?
It's the moves that they haven't made right now.
Drew, but if you think about it, I mean, like, what are we talking about here? I mean, the Jets, I mean, it's not like they have to acquire a lot of second line or third line wingers. We're talking about, maybe, I mean, Connor Hellebuyck is obviously the big one, right? And I'm not sure, you know, what that tweet from Kevin Weeks on Monday really meant. Like, to me, it was a little bit annoying, to be honest with you.
It was annoying. I agree with you.
Well, there was nothing to it. There was absolutely nothing to it. That's why the report, I mean, if for those who didn't see it, I mean, I'm not saying anything against Kevin Weeks personally. I'm a big fan of Kevin Weeks. I think he does a great job as an insider. I think we've all seen him break, you know, signings or trades and stuff like that. I'm just saying, like, there was no substance to it. All the tweet said, for those, again, who didn't see it, was, you know, Connor Hellebuyck, could he be on the move? Well, I mean, we've been talking about that for how long now? I mean, there was no bones to it, and he didn't say anything after that. So, I mean, there was no substance to the tweet, and it got people riled up. Maybe that's what he was trying to do. I have no idea. But I think we know, guys, that the trade market in general has dried up. Like, you don't see it. You're not seeing a lot of, I mean, you're seeing a lot of like 1-year deals, a lot of 2-year deals for third and fourth line guys, but it's not exactly like the most active time of the year around the league, right? Like, there's some guys that are still looking for contracts, like, you know, at the top of the list, Vladimir Tarasenko, Matt Dumba. I mean, there's some quote unquote bigger names out there, but no, I'm not that surprised, Drew, because I mean, we talked about it last week. I mean, it doesn't seem like there's a move imminent coming with whether that's Hellebuyck, Scheifele on defense. So really, I think Chevy's probably main focus right now is signing the RFAs, right? And Gabe Velarde for sure, and Morgan Barron are at the top of that list. And I think, you know, if you guys do want to talk about it right now, I think Velarde's an interesting one, right? Because he's coming off of a career year, but that was by far his best year, right? Coming off of that 1-year deal he signed at the same time last year with the Kings, right? So I don't think many people are expecting a long-term deal, Dave, with Velarde. I think a bridge contract, you know, is more likely. Maybe you see it go to 3 or 4 years, right? Because the Jets have 4 years of team control. But I don't think anybody's expecting a 7 or 8 year deal for Velarde. I think, you know, max, you're probably looking at what, 4 or 5 years for him.
Well, yeah, my guess is that Velarde's they're gonna probably bridge him, like I think you said, as in say do a 2-year deal. It's a safe bet. He gets an opportunity to show that last year was not an aberration, but what he's going to consistently do and begin to do as a full-time NHLer. And I think the Jets gives them some, you know, cost certainty for the next couple of years. And then you can lock him in. And we talked about it a little bit last week, that idea of, you know, do you want to take a chance on a guy like you did with Mark Scheifele and buy up his years now? But, you know, it's almost like to me, it's a hard one for Velarde and for the Jets, because it's not like Velarde came up through the Jets system and knew the Jets and knew the organization like Mark Scheifele did. And so there's not that level of connectivity. And I don't know, we don't even know if Velarde's been in Winnipeg yet, right? Like, we know that he did his media availability from Kingston, which is where he's from. Mm-hmm. So we have no idea. And it's hard for him. It's hard to imagine he's like, okay, I'm going to commit to a city for, you know, 4, 5, 6 years. without having some sort of understanding of what it's all about. So my suspicion would be that you do a 2-year deal just to kind of get to know each other. You're not going to be right at UFA, so there's you don't have that same level of concern or urgency. Even if you did a 3-year deal, you're only 1 year away. So I think I could see the Jets saying, let's do a 2-year deal, fair term. And then that way, like I said, you get to see what he can do. And if you're Velarde, it's an opportunity to overproduce over the next 2 years, and the Jets are going to have to pay you.
Well, if you remember back to when the Jets traded for Neil Pionk in the Trouba trade, he was also an RFA, and they signed him, if I recall correctly, I believe it was a 2-year deal worth $3 million per season. So, I mean, again, if you want to look at past action to predict future occurrence, that could be a sort of a game plan, a similar game plan for the Jets to follow. And I mean,
I think Velarde's probably actually going to be around $3 million to $4 million, right, guys? Like
probably. I mean,
maybe a little bit higher. I don't know if he's going to be in the $5 million range yet, Dave. Like I think Velarde's going to get there on his next contract. But remember, like, what did he get from the Kings last year? Like, it was like $1 million, I think. $825.
Yeah, it was like
so,
that
was one of the best bargains in the league, if you think about it, right? So Velarde's going to get a raise. His salary is going to probably at least triple. But I imagine, if I had to guess, I haven't crunched the numbers, like Garrett Hole does. But shout out to Garrett. But I would imagine he's going to probably come in like 2 years, $8 million, something like that, or maybe 2 years, $7.5 million.
Something probably in that realm would make sense to me. I don't think it's going to be much more than that. I'm just trying to look back at when I'm just looking at Andrew Kopp. I mean, you can look at Andrew Kopp. When he signed that 1-year deal with the Jets after the 2021 season, he had come off a season with 40 points, and he signed for $3.6 million. So you're going to be somewhere in the I think the $3.5 to $4 million range, and I think 4 would be on the high end of things. But and probably on a 2-year deal, and very similar to what both of you guys just said, that he would probably want to, before making any sort of longer commitment to Winnipeg, he'd want to get a little bit more accustomed to the organization, a little more acquainted with the city itself. But then again, maybe he says something, that you can always sign a guy to a longer term deal, and if there's not a no trade clause or something, then really it's he's getting some cost certainty. He's getting sort of a bird in the hand as opposed to the 2 in the bush, as the case might be. But I wouldn't expect that to be the case. I would expect it's going to be. I also wouldn't expect it to go to arbitration. I mean, I see no reason why this needs to be any sort of contentious negotiation. Both sides know what the player is likely worth based on what other players around the league have done before. And,
how many Jets over the last 12 years, Drew, have actually gone to arbitration, right? Like you can count that on one hand, right? Like you just don't see it very often.
You mean?
No, that have actually gone to arbitration. Yeah. Like it's with the Jets or most teams, you just don't see it very often. Like if I can't remember the last time a Jet, doesn't matter, but going back to Velarde, when you're talking, if you look at Velarde like a replacement for Blake Wheeler, which I think is fair considering that he can play the right side, right? But just, in terms of his replacement value, Wheeler's replacement value, that is in the Jets' top 9 or top 6, however you want to look at it. I mean, if you're getting Velarde, who's on obviously the upward trajectory part of his career, if he comes in at $3.5 to $4 million, and you also factor in how much money you're spending on the buyout for Blake Wheeler, which I believe is just under $3 million, right? Like it's a good value here. And I think what I'm trying to say is like a bridge contract isn't a bad thing for Velarde, right? Considering that, as Dave mentioned, he's not a Jets draft pick. He hasn't played a single game for the Jets. I don't think, Jets fans should expect a long-term contract. Not to say that, we don't see 3 or 4 years, but I think anything over 5 years, I'd be pretty shocked. And I think, a 2-year, like Drew said, around $4 million, maybe a little bit above, it's hard to predict the exact dollar figure, but I think a guy coming off a 23 goal, 41 point season, that is a good, reliable defensive forward. And at his age, at 23 years old, I think that's kind of what you should be expecting. A couple years, around $4 million a year. And I think that's going to be good value for the Jets, to be honest.
Yeah, it strikes me as it's probably an agreement that's going to work out for both teams, Dave, that neither side will be upset about that. And if Velarde goes and outplays it, which I assume he thinks he will, then he'll get paid, 2 years down the road, or he'll get paid even a year or so down the road when he's eligible to sign another, a contract extension with a year before the contract expires, something along those lines. I wouldn't expect there to be I don't think that he thinks that he's going to break the bank on this contract because he hasn't really done. I mean, all due respect, a 40-point season is nice, but it's a 40-point season. It's not something that you plan a parade over.
Yeah, no, I think we are all in agreement in that regard. Exactly why I think a 2-year deal makes sense for everybody. I mean, he's talked, and I saw Alan just brought up his Alan Hayes says that he's got a concern about his back issues, and Velarde said in his media availability that his back is no longer an issue for him, and it hasn't been for a while, and that he's it's something that was impacted him early in his career, but it didn't impact him last season. And he said that but again, if you're the Jets, you know, to have that certainty, it's not just about certainty on the scoring sheet. It's of course about health issues and that sort of thing. So no, I think 2 years really does make a lot of sense. And I think I'm with Ezzy. I think it's probably in that, you know, $3 to $4 million range, something like that. Maybe I'll go 3.4 for my prediction of the 3.4 to 3.6 for Gabe Velarde. So I'm guessing 3.5. For
but obviously we're joking, Dave, but honestly, it's, you know, these are the type of contracts that I think are the hardest for agents and teams, right? Because you've got a guy who everybody knows has a high ceiling, right? Like he's a first round pick, and everybody can, and also you have to factor in that there were so many centers with LA, right? Like you had Anze Kopitar there, you had Philip Deneau there, Quinton Byfield was playing center, Rasmus Kupari even was playing the same kind of role at times that Gabe Velarde was when he was having the injury problems, right? So I think this one, I realize you're joking, right? But you know, honestly, it could be anywhere from 3 million to 4 million. Like I have absolutely no idea, but it's safe to say it's going to be somewhere in that range because he hasn't established himself yet. So he's not in that $5 to $6 million range.
No,
that's for sure.
No.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to finish the thought. I was just going to say, so to me, it makes a lot of sense for the organization and the player to do that. And you're right, Drew. Absolutely. There's absolutely no chance this is going to arbitration because that wouldn't be good for either side. You don't start the relationship by going to arbitration. So again, I think it's fairly reasonable to suggest that it'll be a 2-year deal. It'll be in that, let's say $3.5 million range, somewhere, you know, plus or minus that. And again, I think that works for both because it gives Gabe Velarde an opportunity to see what this city is all about. And it gives the organization time to evaluate. They obviously wanted him. They obviously scouted him. They obviously decided that he was a player who is someone that they wanted in Winnipeg. But again, you have to see if he's going to fit. And that 2-year deal will give them that opportunity.
Well, let me ask you guys about Morgan Barron. He's the other Jets player that's filed for arbitration. And again, sort of similar situation. I wouldn't expect it to go all the way to arbitration. But, you know, Morgan Barron is, you know, he had his first real significant playing time in the NHL last year, getting the 70 games. He puts up 21 points, the 8 goals, 13 assists. You know, a guy who showed a lot of, I would say that he showed that he's an NHL regular. He's probably a bottom of the lineup NHL regular, and maybe in a pinch he can play up a little bit higher. But how do you sort of see that negotiation happening? Could you see maybe Morgan Barron being a longer term deal with a lower AAV so that he sort of gets a little more assurance for a guy who's really, I mean, again, a guy who doesn't have the highest of pedigree. He wasn't a first round pick. He was a 6th round pick. You know, could he be a guy who maybe gets a 5-year, you know, I'm just throwing numbers out, you know, $2.5 million a year sort of contract and gets a little bit of a longer term for it? How do you think that negotiation is going to play itself out?
Well, Drew, you say he's not from a high pedigree. He did go to an Ivy League school, right? Cornell. He was the leading scorer. I'm just bugging you, obviously, but you know, he was the top scorer, as I mentioned. So, I mean, this is a good player, and I agree with you. I don't know if, you know, Morgan Barron, you could say his ceiling is a first line winger. I wouldn't say that. Like, I do think that he has the potential because, you know, he is relatively young at 24 years old, I believe, 24, 25 years old, right? 24. So I think, you know, he still has a lot of development to go. I would say, like, sometimes I think when a guy is 24, 25, you already consider him a veteran, but not necessarily the case when a guy played, you know, 4 years of college hockey, right? So yeah, Drew, could the Jets sign him to a longer term contract with a lower AAV? Like, remember back in the day, Calle Yarncroke signed that contract with the Predators. Maybe, like, I would have no problem with that. Like, I think Barron is a guy, it'll be interesting to see, you know, with the additions of Alex Iafallo and the addition, like the re-signing of Vlad Nemesnikov, it'll be interesting to see, like, is Morgan Barron a guy that is guaranteed a spot on the third line, or is he a guy that gets, you know, bumped down? Because we've talked about, like, a guy like Mason Appleton. I think based on his offensive production, I think the argument could be made that Mason Appleton the way this Jets team is currently constructed, Appleton is more of a fourth line guy, right? So I just wanted to throw that out there. Lowry, Appleton, and Barron were kind of staples of that third line. But now you've got options, right? Like Nino Niederreiter could be a third line guy, right? So that probably pushes Morgan Barron down. But I would expect it to be a shorter term deal, Drew, just because, as you just mentioned, he's coming off of his first full NHL season. So I don't know if you're going to see, Dave, like a 5 or 6 year or 7 year deal. I think 7 would be really shocking to a lot of people, but I would expect Barron to probably be similar to Velarde, right? Like you're looking at 2 years, maybe you go a little bit higher into 3 or 4 years. But to answer your question, Drew, yeah, like I think, if you can get him, let's say at 2 million AAV or, 2.5 AAV, maybe you lock him up for 5+ years. I have no idea, but I expect him probably to be more of a quote unquote bridge contract.
Dave, do you think that's the way the Jets will go? I mean, I'm just trying to rack my brain on sort of their what I'm going to call bottom of their lineup guys. I don't recall them really ever going. Well, I guess Lowry would be maybe the exception to that, but he was almost, getting close to UFA status when he signed his deal. But I'm talking, about
5-year deal.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm thinking.
Well, Lowry had played 3 or 4 years at least.
Right. He'd
before
already
he signed that contract, right?
As a key member of the Jets and everything else. So, I mean, I'm just trying to think for Morgan Barron, a guy who's, only played that 1 year in Winnipeg so far. Could you see the team maybe sort of changing their approach and going on a bit of a longer term, lower AAV approach with him?
You know what? I would say you could, because they like him and they probably see more potential in him and what his ability is. And you just maybe thinking that he's scratching the surface after his first year playing, 70 games for the Jets this past season. But, you also have to think, what is the next generation? What is the group of guys who are coming up in the system? And are you going to need to have a guy locked in for that kind of term? Now, again, that's the beauty of sports. And that's why this is such an interesting exercise, because it's hard to know, Ezzy, right? We can't write a person's fortune and say, this is what they are. The guy can only be a third liner. The guy can only be a fourth liner. There's plenty of examples of guys who have worked their ways up. And like even a Mason Appleton, for example, started with the Moose as a fourth liner. By the end of the season, he made himself, because of hard work, made himself a first liner. I'm just saying that sometimes opportunities present themselves and guys seize that opportunity. So there's always an opportunity potentially for a guy, especially without, the Blake Wheelers blocking their way, to seize a role if that opportunity presents itself. And then, hey, wait a second, I'm not just a guy who gets, 10 to 15 goals and 10 to 15 assists in a season. Maybe I can get to 20. Maybe I can get to low, 25. I'm not saying that Morgan Barron specifically. I'm just saying that we tend to have these blinders on when it comes to players and think this is what they are and this is all they can be. And again, as he said it, the guy's 24 years old. His career isn't set in stone as to what he can be. So having said that, I still believe, though, the Jets would likely go shorter term here, because I think for now, his skill set isn't necessarily not replaceable in the future by guys who are coming up if you see that opportunity. And so I would see the Jets saying, okay, let's just, again, see what we've got here in Morgan Barron. And if you can show after a couple of years, well, guess what? That pushes a guy like Mason Appleton out of the lineup, and Morgan Barron, you're going to be the guy who we, have, because again, and it's something we've talked about, having an established fourth line is not something to, thumb your nose at. And that's one thing that the Jets haven't been able to consistently do. And it's one thing that you look at Vegas, look how deep that team was. Having a good, effective fourth line is such an important thing. So if Morgan Barron ends up being part of a really good Jets fourth line, that's not a bad thing.
Okay, as he seems to have vanished from the screen, so we'll get him back on here momentarily. Oh, he might be back. I'm not sure if his internet's cutting in and out. He looks a little frozen, but ironic given that he's outside. But I agree with you, Dave. I mean, look, I think the Jets, at least the fact that they seem to have a more consistent identity as it pertains to the bottom of their lineup is going to go a long way this year for the team. I look at a guy like Mason Appleton, and I think you just mentioned him in your response, saying how he sort of climbed his way up from the fourth line of the Moose to get to where he is. He's a guy that I think is going to need to demonstrate more, especially on a Jets team now that has increased depth, because there are too many times where Mason Appleton can disappear for long stretches at a time. We remember he sort of had that that great game. I think it was against Colorado earlier in the year last year, if you remember that one. And then, where you're like, okay, is he finally going to maybe break through and prove to be a little bit more than what he's been so far in his career? And of course, you can't, the injury factor is a significant one with him as well. You can't discount that. But this is a guy who I think is just always needs to show a little bit more. I think there's more there, but he's never been able to demonstrate that he can actually put it forth. And there's more options now for the Jets at the bottom of their lineup. So I don't think that he is necessarily just guaranteed anything without having to show that he's actually going to grab it. And I think it's a big year for him as a result of that increased depth.
Well, and I think that is a key point, Drew. I think the key is that Rick Bowness has to play his lines. He can't, and that's something he's well known for. It's what all the folks in Dallas, when they said, "Oh, you're getting Rick Bowness," well, your big dogs are going to get, a lot of play, and your third, fourth liners maybe not so much. And that's one thing we'll probably have to see from Rick Bowness how he plays his teams for the 23-24 season. Because again, you don't need to run. That was what we always lamented last year. Why are you playing Blake Wheeler 23 minutes a night? He doesn't need to be playing 23 minutes anymore. You have guys who can take that mantle a little bit, or take some of those minutes away, and he wasn't doing that. But anyways, we'll see if we can get Ez back, and we'll have to pray that the internet's working out there.
Yeah, we'll work on that. Rick Ralph is coming up. He's going to join us in a couple of moments' time. So let's take our first break of the morning. You're watching the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
Keeping Winnipeg laughing for over 30 years. Rumors, Canada's longest-running comedy club, bringing you the biggest laughs from the best comedians on the planet. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Jon Stewart, Dennis Miller, Brad Garrett, the greats, and all the up-and-comers too. When was the last time you laughed out loud? Make it a great night out with friends, or book your office or birthday party. Even a fundraising event at Rumors. Get all the details and dates on upcoming shows at rumorscomedyclub.com.
Hi, Ez. A strange question for you, but why are you lying on the ground being crushed by a piano?
Well, Drew, I definitely tried to carry this baby grand piano down the stairs by myself, and somehow I failed miserably.
Right. Yeah. Sorry, that was a silly question on my part. My apologies. Would you like me to call Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage to help you move the piano? They are the most experienced piano moving company in Winnipeg, after all.
Yes, please call Rolly's and hurry. This piano is very, very heavy.
Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage offers stress-free residential moving services while taking great care of your personal belongings, including your piano. At Rolly's, no job is too big or too small. For more information, visit rollys.com.
Hi, it's Drew from Illegal Curve here. Selling your home can be stressful, but it wasn't for me. Thanks to my friends at Zappia Group Realty, they made the process so easy. My home sold within 48 hours and with multiple offers. Zappia Group Realty took care of everything with their exquisite customer service and attention to detail. If you want to sell your home for more in less time, get started by talking to Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty. Online at zappiagroup.com.
Hey, Drew.
Ezzy, whoa, what a smile!
Yeah, I got my crowns done at Linden Market Dental Center, and they whiten my teeth.
I see.
They're so bright that every time I smile, they go...
We have hockey tonight. Do you have a mouth guard to protect those pearly whites?
I sure do.
Whoa, they even ting through the mouth guard.
Linden Market Dental Center covers all your dental needs from restorative to cosmetic dentistry and will fit you with a sports guard for that active lifestyle. 877 Waverly. See lindenmarketdental.com.
Boston Pizza harnessed Fanalytics to help optimize no-look dipping. Ooh, making adjustments so you can stay focused on the game. The playoffs at Boston Pizza, powered by Fanalytics.
9:30 in the morning. I'm not sure what time it is in the Maritimes, but my maritime math tells me it's time to welcome Rick Ralph to the program. Mr. Ralph, good to see you. Welcome to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
Drew, thanks for having me. It's 11:30. The taps are pouring already out east by.
Yeah, but the taps have been pouring since about probably 10 a.m. or if they even stopped from the night before. So
yeah, let's not judge here. It's a little early on a Saturday, isn't it?
I'm not judging. I'm applauding. I think that's fantastic.
Fire. Is he cold?
Dave's always cold. Look, he's the skinny. He's got no meat on his bones, so he's always a little bit chilly. Ginsburg's computer randomly shut down in the middle of the show, so now he's doing it off an iPhone. Basically, Rick, what we're saying is, in the 12 or so years that you've known us, the professionalism has not improved at all. If anything, we've just gotten older and slightly dumber.
No, well, that's to be expected, really. And as he doesn't pay his bills on time, which is why he's on his iPhone now. But
how does that look, Rick? Does that look good?
It will be 12 years. This September 11th is when I landed here in Winnipeg and to cover the Winnipeg Jets. Overheard a conversation in a studio in downtown Toronto about they needed to staff Winnipeg. And I said, I know a little bit about the city because my grandparents are from here. And my dad was from Neepawa. So that's how I ended up here. And now off again.
So for those who don't know, which is probably I don't know if it's been public news or a public announcement or a key to the city presentation has happened or anything along those lines, but you are off to join your significant other Samantha in Calgary in the next couple of weeks, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, about 4 weeks from now. She's already out there, started a new job. She's in the media as well, so she had a great opportunity and couldn't turn it down. And so, I'm the reason that we moved here to Winnipeg, and now she's the reason that we're going to Calgary. So another month left here in the province, and nothing but great memories and friends too.
That's good. Do you have cowboy boots? That was the most pressing issue that I wanted.
I have cowboy boots. I have a hat. I have I have all that gear. So yeah, we've been going to Stampede for a number of years. I was out there earlier this year last weekend for the kickoff of Stampede. That's winding up this weekend.
There you go. It's funny. I turned on the TV yesterday, and I guess there was maybe highlights from the Stampede were on or something. And my son, he's 5, he said, "Dad, what is this?" And I said, "I think it's the Calgary Stampede." And he said, "What happens at a Stampede?" And I'm thinking to myself, the only part about the Stampede that I really know anything about has to do with the parties and the alcohol enjoyment and everything else. I honestly don't know what happens at a regular Stampede if you're watching like a Stampede event. So that's not really a question per se. It's just more of a comment that I'm completely ignorant as to actually how Stampede
rodeo in the afternoon. The chuck wagons run at night, and they've got bands every night, plus the stuff you mentioned, plus the midway.
Okay, as long as I can get some mini donuts, that's the important part.
Yeah, that's right at the entrance.
So, we're going to talk about the current Jets. We'll sort of bounce between looking back and looking forward in the next little bit. Do you have any what's your most prominent memory, I guess I would ask you of your time here in the PEG and dealing with us yokels and the other yokels that populate this media market? I
think the one that stands out right away is the preseason game against the Columbus Blue Jackets and Dustin Byfuglien introducing himself to the crowd, which made him the fan favorite from his entire time here. The building for a preseason game, and I've been to a lot of NHL preseason games, that was electric for a preseason game. And that first shift with him and Mark Stewart, that I'll remember. But I'll also take, the callers, the contributors to the radio station. That was a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, our good friend Ralph, of course, Ralph and St. James, keep your stick on the ice, that sort of thing. And I guess from the radio perspective, I mean, you create a bond with these people. You create and you've obviously had the opportunity to meet a lot of them, but you almost create a friendship, and then you finally meet in person and to really sort of cement the friendship, I would argue.
Yeah, it's it's not that common, but it was here for whatever reason. It wasn't in Toronto. You rarely met anybody in Toronto. You met a few of them, but not many. But here it was more of a community around the hockey club and on the fan base and the radio station for that matter. You mentioned, Ralph from St. James, Straight Blade Ralph, and, Cosmic Bob, all kinds of characters. The job was to kind of, in the early days, entertain the crowd, on the back of a Winnipeg Jets game, and at the same time, analyze what happened and it's passionate. And some days, there was a lot to talk about, serious topics, so-called serious topics. And then other days, not as much. So you try to keep it a little bit light, have a little bit of fun while you're doing it. And I had fun. So I think the others did as well. Most did, not everybody.
Rick, I don't know if you can tell that I'm wearing the TSN 1290 shirt right now, but I
didn't pay for that either, did you?
I can definitely, I'm sure Drew would say the same thing. And Richie, if he's listening or watching this later, we had so much fun doing it with you all those years. And like you said, forming those personal relationships. I remember Huss and Lawless had the Caller of the Year awards back in the day. I think we actually played pickup hockey earlier that night, if I'm not mistaken. And Rick, you were in net, and I don't think you were letting many pucks past you. But it was such a blast to do those pre and post game shows. I was only the fill-in guy. It was Trevor Kidd and JP Vigier were obviously the main guys. But I wanted to ask you about this current Jets team, because right before you popped on, we were talking about it's been very quiet over the last week or 10 days. Obviously, the Pierre-Luc Dubois trade was huge, and then the Jets signed a bunch of players after the draft. But I guess what is your kind of overall take on the Jets off season? Because as you know, I mean, it's not common that the Jets have all of these core players that have either been traded, bought out, or could possibly be traded when you're talking about Hellebuyck or Scheifele.
Yeah, I think this is a significant offseason here for general manager Kevin Cheveldayoff, who is the second longest termed GM in league history right now, as among the current guys, right? Armstrong, I think, in St. Louis has got him by a year. But you talk about Scheifele now into the final year of his contract, Hellebuyck, Niederreiter, Dylan DeMello, Brennan Dillon. Those are significant pieces. And you've already looked at your captain, Blake Wheeler, has gone to New York and take a minimum deal there. And then you've got Pierre-Luc Dubois, who's ended up in LA. Now, I like what they got in return for Dubois. He wasn't going to stay, and I'm surprised Scheifele's made it this far. I would be surprised if he starts the season with the Winnipeg Jets. But at the same time, you look at it from Kevin Cheveldayoff's standpoint, they do have him for another year. You're not going to let that guy walk. He's not going to re-sign here, nor is Hellebuyck. Both have made it known. And so at some point, preferably I would think in the offseason, you're going to move him. But the other general managers know what position Kevin Cheveldayoff is with these players, and they're not exactly going to try and, help them, so to speak. So the offseason, when you're trying to move these big pieces, sometimes isn't the easiest, because a lot of the teams have kind of settled and are trying to see what they've got. Once the season gets underway, then I think, teams that had expectations and maybe you're not meeting them, then they enter the picture in trading those kind of players. But it's a significant offseason, losing Buff, at one point, and then Patrick Laine moving off to Columbus. I mean, those were big events, but you're right. Like, we haven't seen this many core people come up with question marks, and it's a big year in the offseason. I think we see that every year, but this is a significant one here and a real change of the guard. I mean, Lowry's 30 now. Scheifele's 30. I mean, even Ehlers is 27. There's, the return you get, I think Iafallo is 27 and Velarde, I think, is 23. So that's the positive there. But at one time, the Jets were the draft develop. They still are. But now this core of draft and develop, and some acquired by trade, are moving on. So, we haven't seen that yet in this organization.
Well, Rick, you're talking about moving on and vibes, and you were here. You've been in here since the beginning. So what are you noticing from off the ice, an organizational perspective? Because it's different, right? Before the playoffs began, they released their, let's say, ill-advised commercial to try and threaten fans to buy season tickets. They say it was for a corporate perspective, but from the off-ice perspective, the attitude towards the team, the thoughts towards the team, what have you noticed how they've evolved from when everybody was just ecstatic to have the NHL back? Because I agree with you, by the way, that preseason game was one of the most electric games I've been to, period. Mm-hmm. That was like, it felt like a game 7 of a Stanley Cup Finals, let alone a preseason game. Are we talking about practice? So I agree with you. It was crazy that being in that building. I remember saying to a friend when they were looking at their Jets tickets to pick a game, I said, you pick that preseason game, because I'm telling you, it's going to be absolutely electric. And it was. Well, in that fall, going out to Iceplex, and my first time out there, I arrive, it's training camp. Usually there's nobody in the building but media and some players, and the place was packed. And I thought, this is going to be I knew coming out it was going to be magical, but not quite as big as it was. The off-ice stuff now, we all heard about the waiting list and trying to get tickets when the team first got here, and now you can get a ticket. That's normal, I think, course of business. I mean, the team would like to have, I would think, a little more support, because you're hearing from some people that are either giving up season tickets or going into bigger groups. Times are tough right now economically for a lot of people. So I understand that, but this isn't the first time we've been through an economic time like this. And there's NHL teams, they all go through it. So if this team becomes very competitive again and is exciting to watch, the fan base to me will be there. But there's a tough stretch here where, you've got to rebuild this club and rebuild the confidence with your, maybe not rebuild, but retool, and get the confidence of your fan base who are willing to come and watch.
Rick Ralph, our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show Saturday morning. Rick joining us as he's soon to depart for Calgary. Not, I wouldn't say greener grass, because the grass isn't always greener on the other side. But
well, it's actually quite dry out there.
That's right. There's a little bit, exactly.
Everything's on fire.
You could use a little bit of rain, a little bit of water out there.
Yeah.
Coming from the Toronto market, where you spent so much time in the radio industry and the media industry in Toronto, and then you coming here to Winnipeg, what were your sort of what did you notice as the big differences between the two markets? Obviously, Toronto is the elephant in Canada when it comes to just taking in all the oxygen, especially when it comes to sports and everything else. But then coming to Winnipeg, which has got the sort of the intense passion of a smaller market. How did you sort of notice the differences and incorporate that into maybe your day-to-day?
Well, I think that the big difference, I mean, Toronto's got 12 million people within an hour's drive of that arena downtown, right? So that bottom bowl at that lower bowl in Toronto is a lot of corporate type there. And I noticed when I get out here to Winnipeg right away, there's some corporate folks as well, but not as many suits on a given night in the lower bowl. The if I can call it, the average fan had the opportunity to get into the lower bowl, provided they had the money to do it, right? But that was a different vibe that I noticed. The fan base, especially in those first couple of years, very loud all the time. And then, as the years go by, you kind of get into that routine of a regular game and you're being told to make noise. Whereas in the early years, you make noise anyway. So that's a little bit different. I mean, the media coverage, there's not as much here as there is in Southern Ontario. That's just by population, plus your proximity to the United States, bigger markets there, Detroit, Buffalo. So when New York would come to town, the media would be 4 or 5 deep in a circle, boom mics, ladders, that sort of thing. Get here, I could stand off to the side. There wasn't that much unless Toronto or New York came through. So a little bit different there with regards to, how much is covered of the team. And then the aggressiveness of the media, with all due respect to everybody here in the media, it's tough in Toronto. That, you are competing. There was 5 papers, I think, at the time, multiple radio, television. Now you've got blogs as well, and everybody's looking for an angle. And so there's a lot of tough questions that are thrown. But at the same time, you have to be respectful of those tough questions because you don't want to burn any bridges. So I found that a little bit different here, where there maybe wouldn't be as much criticism of the management side or the ownership side as you would see in Toronto. But your manager here, Kevin Cheveldayoff, is about as same as accessibility as it was in Toronto. The difference is you hear from the chairman, Mark Chipman, here, and you don't hear in Toronto from the owner. You never hear from Larry Tannenbaum. You don't hear anybody from that board. And so that's different. The media would take swings at them, but they would never appear in an interview. Whereas Chipman is, available to speak and does speak, and you see him out in the community as well. So that's a big difference I found here.
Rick, just kind of going back to what we were talking about, we've mentioned several times that you're going to be moving to Calgary shortly to join Sam. And, I think there's some parallels with what I think maybe you disagree, but I think we've talked about this on this show before. What's happening with Calgary, not just, Matthew Tkachuk leaving and Johnny Gaudreau to sign with Columbus, but you hear like the Flames, for example, have already traded Tyler Toffoli, but you hear about some of those guys that are in expiring contracts, such as Elias Lindholm. Like, you're starting to see kind of similar, like the core of that team changing. And you hear a lot of talk about, how a lot of players have the Jets and Calgary and the Senators on the no move clause. But, I'd like to get your take on this, because as far as I'm concerned, if you have a winning team, regardless if you're in Winnipeg, Ottawa, or Calgary, or Edmonton for that matter, Edmonton obviously happens to have McDavid and Draisaitl, who I think are pretty good. But I mean, is it your take that, I mean, if a team is doing well, I mean, players are going to want to go there. You think about, 2018 with Paul Stastny coming to join the Jets, and then the Jets going on that run to the West Final that we obviously all remember. Like, what is your kind of overall take on what's happening, not only in Winnipeg here with players wanting to leave prior to becoming free agents, but also what's happening in Calgary, as there, has been quite a little exodus there over the last couple of years.
And you mentioned Edmonton as well. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. Let's go back 8 years. Nobody wanted to go to Edmonton. They couldn't get free agents. And now people want to go to Edmonton. Why? Because of McDavid and Draisaitl. So a winning atmosphere And I don't know about inside the dressing room there, how tight that group is, but the team has performed well. So I assume things are okay there. That's attractive. Calgary, you mentioned too. I mean, there's a situation where they were in what Winnipeg is in now. And you look at Johnny Gaudreau moving right away. They're big pieces. They're core players. They're gone, all of them. And they've retooled that pretty aggressively. And I think of Vegas as a great example as well. When you see what they do and make a run toward the final and they can't win it all, they retool. That's a little bit different with the expansion, but they still are pretty aggressive in being able to retool. Different market, right? You very competitive there for the dollar, so you always have to be top of mind. So I get that. A little bit different than it is here. But I think Calgary is a pretty good example of, what can happen with teams and where Winnipeg is right now. We'll see when they come out on the other end, if Scheifele's here, what they get in return for him as well. And do they move a guy like Niederreiter, who I was really impressed with last year for the Jets, in the final year of his contract as well, plus the two guys on the back end. Those are some pretty core pieces, but Calgary's done it. The jury is still out, I think, on where Calgary's at, but we'll see that heading into this season. But they've been, I think, a year ahead of what Winnipeg's having to do this summer.
Now, Rick, we talk about the changing media landscape. We're doing the show on our YouTube channel, obviously not on the TSN 1290 sound waves anymore. And it's changing landscape in a lot of markets, right? We know in Vancouver, Edmonton, obviously the most recent big cut, but obviously across Canada. And you're seeing this move. But I guess reflecting back on your time here in media in Winnipeg and obviously on the radio station, did you have a favorite call that you ever did? Or was it the time that Remus and I ended the strike at 5 o'clock in the morning on the airwaves? But
that was great. Everybody's phone going off at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday.
Yeah, I get a text from Remus. I think I'd fallen asleep like an hour before, expecting it to end, and all of a sudden Remus is like, "The strike is over," and I'm like,
"Lockout.
Okay.
It wasn't a strike."
Oh, sorry, the lockout. The lockout's over, and I'm like, "So what do you want to do?" He goes, "Well, Rack says we should get to the station." I'm like, "Okay," and all of a sudden it's like Remus and I for like an hour until anybody starts filtering in. But anyways, I'm not expecting that to be your top memory. But what was maybe some of your core?
It was an operation they ran there.
Oh, let me tell you.
Well, yeah, that's a little bit different too, because I was fortunate. I started at what was called the Fan 590 in Toronto about 2 years after it launched. It was the first and only sports station in the country at the time. We had a large staff. So you would have had a staff on the air Sunday morning at 7 o'clock anyway. We had one, weekend nights till 5 in the morning. We were almost 24/7 in the early days. They scaled that back a little bit. But yeah, we didn't have that luxury here in Winnipeg. So the weekend morning on a Sunday in the summer was not, as you mentioned, staff. So it was kind of like the volunteer fire department, I think, of back home, where the alarm goes, everybody gets paged, and whoever can get there first gets on the air, and away you go from there. But yeah, and that's what that was. It was a pretty good memory. But yeah, the sports radio landscape, as you mentioned off the top, has changed quite a bit. And, we went from being the first, I say we, when I was there, the first sports station. And I think Bell at the time got a little bit annoyed that we kept using their people from TSN on our radio station. So they thought, well, we can do this too. So they started TSN 1050, right? 1290 was already here for years. They just rebranded it once I get out here. Vancouver, Edmonton, Ottawa, Montreal, Hamilton. And now we're going back the other way. Everything's being scaled back, unfortunately. And, I think time is limited for Montreal and Ottawa as well, unfortunately, with the NHL rights there. When those packages are up, there's rumors that maybe they're next. So that's unfortunate. A lot of good people, men and women, that'll be out of work in industry. And I meet so many people on the street here, and, if I go to a Bomber game as well, and, they miss the radio station, as we all do. It's a lot of fun. It was very successful. That people, I don't think, realize that in our demographic. Some of the shows were, number 2 in the market in the male 25-54 category. So it wasn't like, we weren't making money. I think we weren't making enough for the parent company. And, they're focused mostly on cell phones and cellular now. So, and internet. So I get that, which is here we are now on the internet. So I guess they're winning that way as well.
Rick Ralph, our guest on the Illegal Curve hockey show. Yeah, they somehow the corporations always end up winning, which is sort of a little bit of a disheartening reality to have to deal with. But nonetheless, that seems to be the case. Piggybacking on that, the next sort of model for rights and media rights, especially when it comes to radio broadcast. Is there a reason for teams to have radio broadcasts 10 years from now, 15 years from now, or are we strictly going to be a completely streaming landscape? I mean, that's just sort of a topic of conversation more than anything.
Yeah, well, I think your AM radio stations, they're on their last legs. We've seen that with Bell trying to sell some, and there's no buyers. To broadcast with an AM transmitter is quite expensive, to my knowledge. Not as expensive with FM. Even some automakers are going to get rid of AM radio. I think you're always going to have radio. It's just what version is it? You mentioned streaming, and I think that's what we're going to see. Some sort of FM or something even better as far as technology streamed in the cars. We already have that with satellite, a lot of channels. So that will be there. It's just, do we use it traditionally? I mean, you can play stuff at home. Here we are right now, staring at a computer screen. So things are a little bit different. It's still all evolving. But, I was reading a stat earlier, I think this year about, how vinyl records have outsold CD players. So life moves, things will evolve. We still have radio stations. I think you're going to see AM move over to FM. We've already seen that in Calgary with Chorus Communications getting rid of their rock station out there, moving the talk station over to the FM. Got to ask the CRTC about that first. So, that got a little bit muddy. But I think you're going to see more of that, where the AM stations move to FM or are just unplugged completely and the transmitters let go.
Let me ask you this, Rick. So, I mean, obviously, when the station existed or sports radio stations existed, there's obviously, the people who just keep it tuned to that station all the time. They never change their dial, no matter basically what's being discussed. Do you think that the removal of that creates more of a disengagement between the fan base and the teams themselves, that there isn't that sort of intermediary to sort of, keep the ties that bind even tighter? That just strictly, the team journalists and, talking to the fans. Yes, it maybe removes one filter, but it also sort of creates only the rose-colored glasses viewpoint. Does that lead to disengagement?
Yeah, I think you're bang on there, Drew. And, because we were an independent party, we were a partner with the club, but we weren't owned by the club. So we had, ways of, and I always tried to be fair. If I was going to criticize the team, I have to be sure that, what I'm saying is correct and it's also fair. And then when things go well, right, the cup has to be half full as well. So you had to be fair on both sides. But I think when you remove that day-to-day chatter on a station, and you're right, people who are driving for a living or maybe sitting at a desk would stream it all day long. You lose that chatter around the hockey club. So, yes, the Jets have taken it in-house. We've seen that with some other teams as well. I'm not as fond of that, with all due respect to the folks that are working there, because I know a number of them and they do a great job. But you're not going to be as critical as, say, we would be on the radio station. So there is that. When you lose that and it's gone, people have to either find it somewhere else or it's gone. And maybe there's not as much chatter. Let's face it, for the Jets, it was free advertising every day. For the Bombers as well, for the Goldeyes, right? It's free. And now the Bears, there's a basketball team here, which I somehow got in here without me noticing. I'm just kidding. But
you can't get tickets to it. They were sold out again last night.
Yeah, Potts was there. So maybe I'll get to a game before I go. But
I'm going on Sunday. You can come with us on Sunday if you want.
Do I have to sit with you?
You can sit with my kid. I mean, I can sit somewhere else. It's up to you. It's completely up to you. I don't want to force your hand or anything.
Yeah, but that chatter, right? That's advertising for your hockey club or your football team. That when that chatter is not there, that advertising is gone. I'll just call it advertising. That's gone. And so, the teams try to do it themselves, but you lose that, that third party that was doing that job for you. Not intentionally for you, but just keeping everything top of mind. So now it comes down to you guys and us and podcasts and, other avenues. And as I mentioned, the team does stuff. They do some stuff very well, but you're not going to get that critical element of the club from them. That's not their job, is it either?
Rick, just sticking with the media landscape. And then I have to ask you a mortgage question off air, because my mortgage is coming up for renewal in about 6 or 7 months, and the Bank of Canada just keeps increasing those rates. So I need
the
to
way
get one
your
of those.
power keeps going on and off, I'm a little suspect that you'd be able to pay your mortgage.
The most surprising part is that Ezzy ever got a mortgage in the first place. How the hell did that happen?
Yeah, it's true, Rick. Let's just say that I need your help. I need Virtuity Mortgage's help because I don't think I'm going to have enough money to pay for my mortgage the way things are going. But no, in all seriousness, I wanted to ask you about the news that came out. I don't think it's been officially announced yet, but I'm talking about Hockey Night in Canada. Obviously, we can talk about that now because we're not affiliated with Bell Media, even though I'm wearing the T-shirt. But what are your thoughts on, the news that, Ron MacLean could be gone, Jennifer Botterill could be gone, Kevin Bieksa, Kelly Rudy. Apparently, it might just be Elliott might be the last man standing with the new crew. But just wanted to ask you about that. I wasn't planning on asking you about it, but I was definitely surprised because, I thought, McLean, Rudy, Botterill, Bieksa, I thought they were a great crew.
Well, let me just provide some context to Ezzy's question for people who might not be aware. Howard Berger, who's been involved in sports media in Toronto for decades, came out with that report saying that it's going to be more or less wholesale changes at Hockey Night in Canada, that Elliott Friedman would be the last man standing, that all the individuals as he named were going to be out for this coming season. Now, Rick, you probably know Howard personally, so I guess you can answer Ezzy's question now.
Yeah, and I've seen Howard's report. I won't doubt Howard because I know he's got some contacts, not only within the Leaf organization, but also, with Hockey Night in Canada. Mm-hmm. I mean, Ron MacLean, that's going back to when Dave Hodge flipped his pen and then Ron came in, if I'm not mistaken. So that, there's a generation of people that only know Ron MacLean. I know George as well. They moved him in there to try and get a little bit of a different look, and that didn't work. So Strombolopoulos moved on, and they brought Ron back. But this is a changing of the guard. It happens. We've seen it with the national news in this country as well. Some of it positive, some not so much. But, to see Ron MacLean go, if that's what's going to happen, and Jennifer Botterill, I like, and I've heard different things out of Toronto as well with, when it comes to hockey coverage, looking at the television screen from a producer's perspective and saying it doesn't represent the country of how the country is made up from different nationalities now. So that may have something to do with it. I don't know who's making that call. It would go up quite high. I mean, Joel Darling is, I think, one of the executive producers. I know a couple of the others that are there, but I'm not sure who's at the top of that because it could be on the Rogers side. And outside of Hockey Night in Canada, which is it used to be a CBC thing, and now it's all owned by Rogers. So someone's making a decision up at the top there, if that's going to be the case. And Kelly Rudy's had a pretty good run as well. But there's a lot of generation of viewers now, you could argue, that don't know who Kelly Rudy is or don't remember him playing. So that's fair. Jennifer's younger. I think that's unfair. And I thought Bieksa did a good job as well. I think the challenge, and a lot of people have mentioned it to me, especially this summer as well, and watching NBA coverage south of the border, with Shaq and Barkley, and you look at the NHL coverage south of the border as well with Messier and Gretzky and Chelios. And that I think people wonder, why can't we in Canada have that? And I suggest to them, no, that's a lot of money that's going on down there. That's a lot of revenue, and that's a lot of money as well. And in this country, they may not, and it's hard for me to speak for Rogers, they may not have that kind of money to throw around to attract that type of talent to come in and be a broadcaster. And I think that's always been a question mark. I remember going back a couple of decades as well with, hockey coverage. What happens when Gretzky retires? What happens when some of these big stars retire? Why can't they be lured to the broadcast side like you see it in the NBA, where those guys certainly don't need the money, but do it anyway? Mm-hmm. And now I think you're starting to see that south of the border. The question is, can they do it north of the border? So if what you're saying is true, and Elliott's the only one left, Elliott's good, but I don't know that he can, with all due respect to Elliott, he's not going to carry that whole thing by himself. But who knows what they have in store then? It could be something entirely different. And we used to see that with Coach's Corner, right, in the first intermission. At one time, that was appointment viewing. I remember being at the Air Canada Center in the first period. Everybody's in the press box watching the TV to see what Don was going to say. Mm-hmm. Now nobody wants to hear what Don has to say. And, Don, he's doing the podcast as well. But now here goes, if this is all true, Ron goes as well. So they could be almost reinventing the wheel here, or trying to going forward. They've already taken one swing at it with George. It didn't work. So be curious if indeed Elliott's going to be the only one that survives that purge. Who, if any, is coming in to work around him, and how will they present that? What will we see? That's a big question.
Rick, it's simply going to be Elliot Friedman reading his tweets. That's all it's going to be. He's just going to be live on air and it'll be reading his tweets.
He'll remember all of his tweets without having to read them. He's got an incredible memory. I worked with Elliot and George. In fact, I talked about the first sports station. Those were the characters that were I call them characters with all due respect, because Elliot's done a fantastic job. But George was there, Elliot was there, and one of the guys, Brian, is now one of the top producers for Hockey Night in Canada. So it was a good group, and they've done very well. Which is, and I think of one guy, Greg Sansoni, who was a producer when I met him. He used to be for Bob McCowan, who, for those who haven't heard, Bob suffered 2 strokes in hospital. He's still in hospital, from my understanding.
I think he got. I think I saw a tweet that he got out, which is good news.
Is he out now? Okay,
he's out. Yeah, and hopefully on the road to recovery.
Yeah, I hope he recovers well. So, but those guys, the younger guys, were there. Sansoni's now pretty high up in the Rogers side, so that I'd be curious to know if he is making some of those decisions with some of the guys, including Elliot, who we all worked together at one time back in the day. But Ron McLean was known too. I know Ron a little bit. He would always be in the station and around. Very nice, personable guy, good guy. So if this is the end, that's unfortunate. But at the same time, I get it. With all the changes that are going on, both in media and with teams, it was just a matter of time. He's been there, I think, since the mid-'80s.
Well, Dave Schultz. I'm sorry, Dave. Dave Schultz wrote the first chapter of the book about Rogers getting the NHL rights, which I'm not sure if you've read or not, but it's a great read about the negotiations.
I have not read that. That is quite something, and that rights package.
Yeah.
That would be coming up soon, I think.
2 years, I think. It's almost done.
2 years. Yeah. I remember that being signed. And
the catastrophe that it's been for Rogers, I would suggest.
Yeah. Well, all the people that signed that deal are gone.
It's always easy. Sign it and then leave.
Yeah. Yeah. Keith Pelly, I think, was over in Europe with the European PGA. And I'm not sure where. I think Nadir Mohammed was the head guy. He's gone. I think they've had 2 changes since. It's kind of hard to keep up. I haven't tried to do that, but I have, I do know that all the ones that were there in the power or the capacity to make that decision and sign that package are all gone. So it'll be interesting to see how they approach that in another 2 years.
But you're right, Rick. I mean, it went from appointment viewing to if I watch it, I watch it. And maybe you'll turn in for the second period to watch, the headlines. And that was, and that was about it now from the broadcast perspective. If your team isn't playing, it went from everybody wanting to watch on a Saturday night to whatever, if you catch it, you catch it. If not, it's not the end of the world. And you're also right. I said, I think I wrote about it on Illegal Curve before the Jets were even back, how the TNT model is so much more successful. I'm not even a basketball guy, but I would watch the broadcast, and I still watch TNT to watch Charles and Shaq and Kenny the Jet Smith. And, it's just, they're so good. And Ernie Johnson, of course, but they're so good that even someone who's not a diehard basketball fan would find himself watching the broadcast because it was so entertaining. So, it's possible. There's guys like that in hockey. They just, for whatever reason, can't bring that to consistently on a consistent basis.
Oh, and those are big personalities as well, right, as you mentioned, right? So when you get the NHL stars, like Mary Lemieux is not a big personality. And when I say that, I mean, he's not in front of the cameras. He shies away from the media. That's just not his thing. Awesome hockey player, good person, but that's not going to be his thing. Gretzky, with all due respect to what he's done, maybe if he started opening up and telling a bunch of stories, that would be good. But I think of a guy like Jeremy Roenick.
Absolutely.
That kind of character.
We were all there. We just saw him.
Yeah, those kind of person. And the league does have those personalities, and I'm trying to think of guys that went through Winnipeg that had, the personality. Buff is a character, but I don't know that would translate to television because there's another guy that just doesn't like the camera or for the most part the media. But, you need character players who are quite recognizable as far as stars to be able to make that jump. Like, I don't even think McDavid is that kind of a guy.
No, not at all.
And Draisaitl's not that kind of a guy. So, you go down the list. Is Crosby that kind of guy? I don't think so. I don't think McKinnon is. So where are the character guys that were really good players? And I think that's the challenge for hockey. And then it comes down to money. Are those guys going to do what, the national broadcaster here in Canada offers? And so far,
Yeah, for sure. And you're right, Rick. I mean, Jeremy Roenick, who we just saw obviously at the sports dinner last month, was it? It was phenomenal. And he's a talker, and I coincidentally in that thing I wrote about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, he was one of the guys I mentioned because he is that type of person, that type of personality. He first of all play the game at the highest level, but also has that personality that is engaging. And we saw it, 12, 15 years ago, and we see it again just, last month. So, he's capable of doing that. We could talk about that all day, but, we want to talk about your time in Winnipeg. This is the last one for you, but just maybe some memories here in Winnipeg and as you sign off after over a decade in our fair province.
Like on the air, the memories?
No, just off the air. Just your
memories
your
with us, Rick, specifically.
Yeah.
No, I don't have a funny story. Like I don't know how funny it is, but the only person I knew when I moved out here was Dennis Bayak because I knew Dennis in Toronto. And so Dennis had told me about Illegal Curve and that there was these guys and he felt there was 4, there might be 5 that were covering the team. And so when we got out here, again, Dennis and I were the only ones that knew. Dennis, I think, knew a couple other people here, but I didn't know anybody other than Dennis. So, from day one, just start to meet people. And then I would meet Ezzy, but then I wouldn't see Ezzy the next day. And it would be I think that's a different one again. And then, and then Richard Paul, I'm like, there's a tall one. Like, how many are there? And I would talk to Dennis about this. I said, have you met them all yet? And he goes, well, I've met a few. And it took like 3 weeks, I think, for the two of us to figure out there's 5 of you originally. Right. And because Remus wasn't around very often. So that threw a real curve into it when all of a sudden he appeared. I'm like, which one's this one? But now, and Richard's moved on for the most part. Shauna Sore's been a part of it. So yeah, after a while, it only took 2 or 3 weeks for Dennis and I to figure out how many of them there was, you guys, and what his name was. But yeah, it was a real challenge in those early days, as it was, just to try and understand the city. And I had some fun on the air too. Like somebody would call from Fort Garry and I'd ask why they have a fort, what they're defending, just stuff like that to kind of get used to, the city, the street names, that kind of stuff. That's always a challenge when you're moving to a new city, right? To learn that. But that's where the kind of, the entertainment came in on the early days of the post-game show was, the callers. And I will remember that stuff.
It still cracks me up to this day, Rick, when somebody would ask you how you are and you'd say, I'm not unwell. And they would just immediately they just freeze. They'd have no idea how to respond to that as they're processing exactly what it is that you said. And I can hear you sort of off air, just chuckling to yourself at getting them each and every time when you were able to get them with the I'm not unwell line.
I mean, there's Don who lived in the West End. I'm like, why don't you live in the East, Don? Why? Just an idea. But anyway, what do you want to talk? It never became the big focus, but it was always something little. Cosmic Bob got his nickname because of his phone line quality. He ran it through a transistor radio somehow. So it was feedback sometimes, so it sounded like he was in outer space, and oftentimes when he's calling his topics where he painted his microwave and it blew up, like unprompted for that. That just came out. Right. And I'm laying on the couch at the bench at Boston Pizza. I'm down. Trevor Kidd, I think, was on the air with me, and he's trying to keep it together. I can't. I'm down. I've never had anybody describe that they've painted their microwave and it blew up. But, Dan in St. Vital would call, and he'd always ask if I agree. And I would always agree the first 2 times, and the third one I wouldn't. And then he'd get mad, and then we'd change the caller. Like it was kind of there's the same people. 5% of your audience calls, right? And then, but if something happened in the game that drew others, then you would have more people. But you had to have, just like a bar, to me, you had to have your regulars. And we certainly had that, right? David in Calgary and John in Atlanta, who was the only guy, Georgia with an accent, which was kind of fun to have on.
And don't forget about Marshall in
Vancouver. Like I won't forget bass playing Brian, plays in a band. He's from Windsor Park. And then there's Andrew, who was walking in the snow one night, called the post-game show. You can hear him crunching, as he walks in the crisp snow. Andrew, are you outside? And he stops. There's no more crunching. And so now this becomes like in the middle of the show, it's become a bit of a distraction because I know people are listening to what he has to say, but I also know, like me, all we can hear is him walking in the snow. So, stuff like that. I was here as a kid. My grandmother, as I mentioned, my father was from Neepawa. His family was from Neepawa. His grandparents were the first settlers in Carberry as well. So I've got a deep history here in Manitoba from my dad's side. His uncle was the first superintendent of schools in Portage la Prairie. His other uncle ran Manitoba Hydro in the early 70s. So and then my aunt, I call her aunt, some say aunt. She went to school with Peggy Weems, who was Margaret Lawrence in Neepawa. So they were friends growing up as kids. So I have a real connection to Manitoba. Unfortunately, when I got here in 2011, on September 11, they're all dead. All my relatives are gone because my parents were older. So my brother and I came out. We did visit a lot of grave sites and met everybody, but it was kind of one-sided conversation. And sometimes it was on the radio.
Rick Ralph from day one, even if you weren't sure which one of us was which, you've treated us with respect.
I got it figured out. Yeah.
You got it figured out now, finally?
Yeah, Dennis and I both figured it out. It took about 2-3 weeks, though. Yeah. You guys were never in the room together all at once.
I bet you never thought you'd work so closely with Remus then, did you?
Yeah, well, Remus, then I end up with Remus, working with him day to day.
You could have applied for funding. I think you could have maybe been like an adult daycare sort of situation with him for a while there.
But not a guy. I'd worked with some producers in Toronto, and some of them were pretty good. But nobody was better than Michael to find guests somehow deep into the channels of the internet, like how he'd come up with a former player who's now living, somewhere in the United States running a hockey school. He was always really good at that and continues to be. But yeah, that's what I'll take from working with Remus. He was a lot of fun to work with, but he was also really good at finding guests.
We somehow over the years we've all grown up a little bit, we've all matured a little bit, we've all sort of shared that a little bit, just a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit, but we've all sort of shared that same commitment to respect for one another. And like I said, from day one, even if you didn't know which one of us was which, you treated us with respect and regard. And I can say it, and I'm sure Dave and as you would agree, we appreciate you for all that. And we look forward to, I think we're getting together Wednesday, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah,
Wednesday. Yeah. I was there Wednesday, August 19th.
Did we leave that out? Yeah.
Yeah. After this, hopefully that you don't rescind the invite, Rick.
We look forward to it, Rick. Thank you for this. We'll tip a few back and we'll talk about some more memories. We appreciate you.
Thanks, guys. Good to see you all.
Likewise, Rick. Be
Cheers,
well.
Rick, thanks so much.
See you soon. There he goes, Rick Ralph, joining us this morning. Let's go to break. You're watching the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
Keeping Winnipeg laughing for over 30 years. Rumors, Canada's longest running comedy club, bringing you the biggest laughs from the best comedians on the planet. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Jon Stewart, Dennis Miller, Brad Garrett, the greats, and all the up-and-comers too. When was the last time you laughed out loud? Make it a great night out with friends or book your office or birthday party. Even a fundraising event at Rumors. Get all the details and dates on upcoming shows at rumorscomedyclub.com.
Hi, Ez. A strange question for you. But why are you lying on the ground being crushed by a piano?
Well, Drew, I definitely tried to carry this baby grand piano down the stairs by myself, and somehow I failed miserably.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry. That was a silly question on my part. My apologies. Would you like me to call Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage to help you move the piano? They are the most experienced piano moving company in Winnipeg, after all.
Yes, please call Rolly's and hurry. This piano is very, very heavy.
Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage offers stress-free residential moving services while taking great care of your personal belongings, including your piano. At Rolly's, no job is too big or too small. For more information, visit rollys.com.
Hi, it's Drew from Illegal Curve here. Selling your home can be stressful, but it wasn't for me. Thanks to my friends at Zappia Group Realty, they made the process so easy. My home sold within 48 hours and with multiple offers. Zappia Group Realty took care of everything with their exquisite customer service and attention to detail. If you want to sell your home for more in less time, get started by talking to Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty. Online at zappiagroup.com.
Hey, Drew.
Ezzy, whoa, what a smile!
Yeah, I got my crowns done at Linden Market Dental Center, and they whiten my teeth.
I see.
They're so bright that every time I smile, they go,
"We have hockey tonight. Do you have a mouth guard to protect those pearly whites?"
I sure do.
Whoa, they even ting through the mouth guard.
Linden Market Dental Center covers all your dental needs from restorative to cosmetic dentistry and will fit you with a sports guard for that active lifestyle. 877 Waverly. See lindenmarketdental.com.
Boston Pizza harnessed Fanalytics to help optimize no-look dipping. Ooh, making adjustments so you can stay focused on the game. The playoffs at Boston Pizza, powered by Fanalytics.
Well, that was a fun walk down memory lane with our good friend Rick Ralph joining us this morning on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Big thanks to Rick. In case you miss any of that, in case you miss any of the show, there's an immediate replay on our YouTube channel. And of course, the podcast edition of the show will be available shortly after the show ends, as Dave Minuk does all the great work he does in getting that out on the podcast channels. I'd pretend to know how that works, but you both know I'd be lying about that front. Ezzy's having technical difficulties,
which is appropriate considering it's his last show of the year.
Yeah, it's his last show of the year. He's taking the next couple shows off, so Dave and I will drive this bus home through the end of July,
the dog days of summer.
The dog days of summer, but that's okay. You know how we're going to end it, of course. 2 weeks from today, the 29th of July. AMA, Ask Minuk and Mindell Anything. That's 2 weeks from now, so you can look forward to that. Get your questions ready. Whatever under the sun you want to know, whether it's Jets related, whether it's Drew related, whether it's Dave related. AMA 2 weeks from today on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, just as we always wrap it up before we head off into our August hiatus. And of course, we will be back in September, right after the Labor Day long weekend. So you'll get about 5 weeks off from us on a Saturday morning. But again, you never know when we're going to pop up. If there's something relevant and worthwhile, we might randomly appear on a midweek Tuesday to bring you the latest on whatever that might be. Looks like Ginsburg's back. So do we start the GoFundMe for your new computer now? I mean, your birthday's coming up pretty soon. Are you maybe asking for a new computer for your birthday? How are you going to resolve this issue? You have 8 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. You'll have 8 weeks after today's show until you're next back on the air. Dave, is there any chance he has this problem resolved in those 8 weeks? You think there is, Dave? Dave's giving 2 thumbs up. I think that's very
today,
optimistic.
I'm definitely going to be buying a new computer. I was trying to log in through my computer, but on my MacBook, but the battery says it's not charging. So that I apologize, boys. That's why I was a couple minutes late here. But yeah, after today, I'm definitely going to buy a computer. But yes, I have asked you boys. My birthday is in 9 days, July 24th. I asked you guys to get me a computer for my birthday present. But as every year comes around, you guys never get me a birthday present. So I'm going to have to buy my own computer. But yeah, I apologize. What a great interview. With
Whoa. First of all, that's erroneous, Ezzy. I bought you a birthday gift. What did you do with it?
Oh, yeah, that's right. You bought me that, whatever that thing was for the snoring, right? It was something that I put in my nose or something like that. But I had to get the real deal, Dave. I had to get the CPAP.
Yeah, and the worst part was it wasn't. I think that was one of those as seen on TV things. And as he tossed it, I was like, "No, it's $30 gift. I guess Ezzy just doesn't care."
Well, it clearly doesn't. Very rude of him, if you ask me. I mean, you're giving the entire audience a seizure today by moving his camera so much. Maybe just leave the camera steady there, big boy, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, the camera's good.
The camera's good. It's everything else about the
Actually, the slow moving the camera's even worse. What are you doing?
Yeah. Can you stop whatever you're doing? Maybe get yourself settled. And yes, it was a great interview with Rick. I can't believe he'd be willing.
Spency thought I bought Ezzy some Coke. No, I didn't buy Ezzy Coke.
Something for his nose. I guess that would make some sense.
It's funny.
But no, it wasn't that.
Spency's quick. He's very quick witted. I got to give Spency credit. He always has the very quick responding comments.
Yeah. Coming up at the bottom of the hour still, Willie Donick, who is the Predators play-by-play guy. He's going to join us to talk about the off-season of changes in Nashville. We know Barry Trotz is running the ship there. How does the outlook look for 2023-24 for the Jets Central Division rival in Nashville? So that's coming up still at the bottom of the hour. Ezra Ginsburg, Drew Mindell, Dave Minuk with you on this Saturday morning. This is the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Big thanks to some of our sponsors, Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club, Betway, Dr. Les Rikus and the team at Linden Market Dental Center, Grid Park, Tough Duck, Boston Pizza, Rolly's Transfer, The Keg, Zappia Group Realty, and Seagram's. Those fine companies are helping support this broadcast, and I wonder if they're regretting some of their decisions as this show goes on this Saturday morning there, Mr. Ginsburg.
No, that money's going to help me buy a computer one day, Drew.
One day. We're all going to...
One day.
We're going to pool our efforts together.
One day.
Yeah, not any day soon, but one day you're going to be able to maybe scrounge things together to make that a reality.
Maybe Dave will give me one of his computers. Dave's got like 12 computers at his house, so
I doubt very much that's going to happen. Is the computer plugged in? Let's start small.
No, it's plugged in. Come on, Drew. This isn't my first rodeo. I realized we were talking to Rick Ralph about the Calgary Stampede, but this isn't my first rodeo here, Drew. It's plugged in. I get the battery's screwed up. I don't know if it's all of that other stuff that I download on this computer. I have no idea, but and when I say about other stuff, I mean obviously Game of Thrones and other great series that I download.
Yes.
CSI Miami, among others.
I think your when you downloaded was called Game of Horns, and that was the part of the problem there. It
was actually the Sopranos, Drew. That's what it was. The Sopranos.
The Sopranos. Yes, I know you enjoyed that show very much as well. Did you guys read the article? Mike McIntyre in today's Free Press sat down with Nino Niederreiter.
I didn't sit down with him.
Oh, spoke with him over the phone is what
they
I meant.
I was going to say, I don't think they flew Mike to Switzerland to have a conversation, but okay.
Spoke with him on the phone. Virtually.
They're actually both in hammocks. They were swinging as they spoke.
Fair enough.
I hate you both. That's what I would say. I just thought it was a very interesting article. Because we talked about that last week on the show, Nino Niederreiter and his impact, because I thought he was a guy that's sort of going under the radar and isn't really being focused on this offseason, when I think he really is one of the key linchpins to the Jets' success next year. This is a guy who, on most teams he plays on, is a key contributor and is a guy who's found a fair deal of success throughout his career. And most of the teams that he plays on are competitive. And I think Nino Niederreiter is just one of those players every team needs, that he's just, I'm pretty sure I said the same thing last week anyways, he's just a professional hockey player. He's going to do what needs to be done to lead his team to success and victory more often than not. And I thought that it was good that Mike to also sit down with him, not sit down with him literally, but speak with him on the phone to talk about his thoughts about the offseason so far and his perspective on the Jets moving forward. I also thought it was interesting this week. I don't know if you guys follow Jay Fresh Hockey on Twitter. He does a great job looking at the game sort of through an analytical bent, and some of his player cards make it really easy for a dullard like myself to understand the impact a player has. And he said the Jets is currently constructed, assuming they don't trade Scheifele, assuming they don't trade Hellebuyck, could sort of be a bit of a sleeper team heading into next year. Not necessarily a cup contender, but maybe better than a lot of people think, given the depth that they have on the roster right now.
Well, yeah, if you want to start off with the Jay Fresh thing, and then I haven't read Mike's article about Nino Niederreiter, but I agree with you, Drew. He's a key player. Like, whether Niederreiter plays on the second line wing, guys, or he plays on the third line wing, that just makes you that. Honestly, you might have one of the better third lines in the league if you've got Adam Lowry between Alex Iafallo and Nino Niederreiter, for example, right? You could also have Vlad Nemesnikov on the wing on your third line, but as we know, Nemesnikov can also center the second line, right? But just getting back to what you were saying about Jay Fresh, I agree. He does a great job. If you're interested in hockey analytics, definitely give Jay Fresh Hockey a follow. We talked about it. The Jets were a 95-point team last year. I mean, there's no reason they can't be a 100 to 105-point team if the majority of their core players stay healthy, right? Like we've talked about it. Nikolai Ehlers, he's got to be healthy for a full season. Cole Perfetti, he's got to be healthy for a whole season. Then obviously, as you mentioned, Drew, I mean, Connor Hellebuyck being part of this Jets team next year is going to go a long way in them being a playoff team, right? But getting back to what you said about Niederreiter, I think, it's going to be very interesting to see in training camp in September, beginning part of the season in October, how these lines kind of shape up. Because we know if Scheifele is in the fold, I mean, Scheifele, Connor, Ehlers is obviously your most likely your first line, but guys like Iafallo, guys like Velarde can play on the second line, can play center or wing when you're talking about Velarde. Dave mentioned this last week, and I think Dave is right. I mean, this is probably Perfetti's year to really establish himself I mean, last year he had 30 points in 50 games, something like that, Dave. Like, he was top 10 in rookie scoring last year, so let's not diminish that. But especially with the injury, I think, the Jets are expecting big things out of Perfetti. Perfetti's expecting big things out of himself, right? But yeah, Niederreiter, Drew, is a guy that, I think I said, I thought he'd played around 400 or 500 games. He's actually played around 800 games at the NHL level. And when you have younger players on this Jets team, we just talked about, Perfetti, and, Velarde is still a young player. Rasmus Kupari is still a young player. David Gustafsson. Having a veteran like Niederreiter, who has consistently been kind of that 40 to 50 point guy, but also a guy who, gets in on the forecheck, leads by example. He's got that physical element to his game, goes to the greasy areas, as they say, right? Yeah, he's going to be an important part of this team. So as I mentioned, haven't read the words that Mike McIntyre wrote on the Winnipeg Free Press website, but there's no doubt that, that Niederreiter trade with Nashville for a second round pick, just it almost looks like it gets better and better as the days go by.
Yeah, I mean, I think when the Jets made that trade, most people declared it as a pretty good steal, even if, the team continued to struggle a little bit. But I don't think anybody ever pointed that struggles at Nino Niederreiter. He's the kind of player that every team wants in the league, just a guy who goes out, does his job with effectiveness, and knows exactly what his role is day in and day out, Dave.
Yeah, there's no question about it, Drew. I mean, look, he's and look, you need that kind of person, and he's in the final year of his deal, of course. So he's going to be looking for some sort of, whether it's an extension with the Jets or and that's what you want. You want a guy who's incentivized to perform, because you're going to need the depth, and we can kind of tie everything in together, because I think Nino Niederreiter is emblematic of this Jet team in general, in the sense that there is a lot of depth with the team, and from what they're bringing, with a guy like him, and it's more that Seattle model, right? Versus having a high-powered top line, a pretty good powered second line, and devoid of goal scoring in the third and fourth lines. You have a little bit more balance throughout the lineup now. I think we'll see, of course, how the year plays out. It's easy to say. It's another thing to see how it actually takes place. But yeah, I think he is, like I said, he'll be an important cog in that wheel in terms of what that Jets production can look like from, what he's done. And yeah, as he's right, it was a steal for a second rounder in the 2024 draft to give up for Nino Niederreiter. Of course, They got it back with the trade for Pierre-Luc Dubois from Montreal, or via Montreal, I should say. But ultimately, he is the kind of player who, has, again, he has very good leadership qualities, not the kind of rah, like, pull a guy in like that, but he leads by example. He does what a lot of the Jets don't do, which is go to the dirty areas. He's not a perimeter player. He's not afraid to be in front of the net and score from that greasy area, as he. So that's, what this Jets team needs. And again, I think he is the kind of guy who, it's like he's a guy who's, again, he's saying the right things, and it's easy to say these things because he is in the final year of his deal, but he's saying speaking to the article that Mike wrote. And if you want to read it, of course, we've got it linked in the morning papers today. So go to illegalcurve.com/morning papers, and you'll be able to see the link to Mike's article. There's another one by Jacob Stoller of the Hockey News on defensemen who could use potentially a change in scenery. And that was about Ville Heinola. So there's some good, and then of course we've got a lot of good video links and audio links that you can find on the morning papers. But getting back to this, again, like I said, I think he is exactly the kind of player who is what the Jets need. Someone who's going to be responsible, who's going to add depth, who's not going to, be a selfish player. And again, that's how this team is going to do it, because it's going to be a lot as by committee, because you're trading away guys who can score. And Blake Wheeler still was a producer. So you're going to need to find replacements for that. And I agree, Cole Perfetti is a guy who's going to have to step up his game big time. He's going to get that opportunity. We heard it from Kevin Cheveldayoff right at the draft. What was one of the things he talked about was that idea of the opportunity for Cole Perfetti. Well, he doesn't say that by accident. He's saying that with intention.
It's funny. I was just looking, and the last word on Nino Niederreiter, but we'll go to break and bring in Willie Donick to talk about the Predators, and we can ask Willie about Nino's influence there because he spent that year there. But it's interesting, in Nino Niederreiter's career, since really breaking in and becoming a regular in the NHL with the Minnesota Wild in 2013-14, he's missed the playoffs once. He missed the playoffs one season, and that was with his last year. No, pardon me, he got traded to the Hurricanes that year. So he's never missed the playoffs since he's been a NHL regular. So that tells you that this is a guy who plays on winning hockey teams. And I think he's one of those guys that everybody, in the league needs. So there's a little bit of trivia if you want to talk about Nino Niederreiter. He's never missed the playoffs since becoming an NHL regular in 13-14.
Drew, sorry, I know we're about to go to break. It's starting to rain out here, so I'm going to cut out and I'm going to have to rejoin inside. Later,
no, you don't have to rejoin. It's fine if you don't. We'll see. There he goes. Willie Donick joining us next. You're listening to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show.
Keeping Winnipeg laughing for over 30 years. Rumors, Canada's longest running comedy club, bringing you the biggest laughs from the best comedians on the planet. Jerry Seinfeld, Chris Rock, Jon Stewart, Dennis Miller, Brad Garrett, the greats, and all the up-and-comers too. When was the last time you laughed out loud? Make it a great night out with friends or book your office or birthday party. Even a fundraising event at Rumors. Get all the details and dates on upcoming shows at rumorscomedyclub.com.
Hi, Ez. A strange question for you. But why are you lying on the ground being crushed by a piano?
Well, Drew, I definitely tried to carry this baby grand piano down the stairs by myself, and somehow I failed miserably.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry. That was a silly question on my part. My apologies. Would you like me to call Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage to help you move the piano? They are the most experienced piano moving company in Winnipeg, after all.
Yes, please call Rollies and hurry. This piano is very, very heavy.
Rolly's Transfer Moving and Storage offers stress-free residential moving services while taking great care of your personal belongings, including your piano. At Rolly's, no job is too big or too small. For more information, visit rollys.com.
Hi, it's Drew from Illegal Curve here. Selling your home can be stressful, but it wasn't for me. Thanks to my friends at Zappia Group Realty, they made the process so easy. My home sold within 48 hours and with multiple offers. Zappia Group Realty took care of everything with their exquisite customer service and attention to detail. If you want to sell your home for more in less time, get started by talking to Frank and Mauro Zappia of Zappia Group Realty. Online at zappiagroup.com.
Hey, Drew.
Ezzy, whoa, what a smile!
Yeah, I got my crowns done at Linden Market Dental Center, and they whiten my teeth.
I see.
They're so bright that every time I smile, they go,
"We have hockey tonight. Do you have a mouth guard to protect those pearly whites?"
I sure do.
Whoa, they even ting through the mouth guard.
Linden Market Dental Center covers all your dental needs from restorative to cosmetic dentistry and will fit you with a sports guard for that active lifestyle. 877 Waverly. See lindenmarketdental.com.
Boston Pizza harnessed Fanalytics to help optimize no-look dipping. Ooh, making adjustments so you can stay focused on the game. The playoffs at Boston Pizza, powered by Fanalytics.
Commercial free from here till the end of the program. Welcome back to the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. As he's changed locations, as he promised that he would, Dave M is still in the same spot. As always, I'm your host, Drew Mindell, here to talk about the Winnipeg Jets and the Nashville Predators as soon as Willie Donick, the Predators play-by-play voice, is going to join us for an update about the Jets division rival, their off-season where they've done a lot of moves. Obviously, a new head man in charge in Nashville in Barry Trotz, replacing David Poile for the first time, I think, in the organization's history. So it'll certainly be an interesting year in Nashville. It's going to be an interesting year in the entirety of the Central Division. What of the Colorado Avalanche, who undoubtedly had a disappointing year last year in losing in the first round to the Seattle Kraken? Are the Avalanche as good as they've been before? Probably not, especially without Landeskog for the entirety of the year. And then there's some other question marks still going around that team. The Dallas Stars, the Minnesota Wild, the Jets. The Central is not the juggernaut that it was a few years ago. The Central arguably is not that really difficult of a division at all. So does that provide the Jets with a leg up, potentially putting them in the top three of that division entering next season. Long ways to go before that, of course. Long ways to go before the season starts. But if you look at the Central Division, Chicago, yeah, they have Connor Bedard, but they're obviously rebuilding. Arizona, well, I'm not sure how they're going to recover without Alex Galchenyuk now after they had to terminate his contract earlier this week. Did you read the quotes that Galchenyuk was accused of saying, Dave?
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it, but it's very uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable. This isn't things that people.
The reality. Well, I think you hit it on the head. He's not well.
Yeah, he's not well. I mean, and we wish him. I mean, you don't want to make light of a situation like that, but it's certainly not a good scenario. And you can understand why his contract was terminated, and hopefully he gets the help that he seems to be in need of, because this is a human person you're talking about first and foremost, more than a hockey player. Not that he was going to be a contributing member of the Arizona Coyotes in any significant way, shape, or form. St. Louis Blues, they're the ones that are still sort of, to me, one of the most interesting teams in the Central, Dave. As St. Louis obviously had that just very disappointing year last year. Are they going to be able to turn it around and get back to where we're used to them being? But we'll talk now about the Nashville Predators, and welcome to the program, proudly sporting his Vanderbilt Commodores t-shirt, which I'm not the least bit happy about as a University of Kentucky fan. Willie Donick, the Predators play-by-play guy, joins us on the show. Willie, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning, guys, and sorry for being a little bit late. I was, I don't know, I was still in the archaic world of phone calls, and I was thinking, wait a minute, they told me about StreamYard here, but it is a good thing, so I can show off my black and gold here and gloat about our victory over the Kentucky Wildcats in football. But we now have your quarterback in Nashville, Will Levis, so we got to root for the Kentucky fans a little bit here.
I understand that. I can accept that a little bit. I was a little torn about that. Look, gloat about your victory over the Gators. I have no problem if you gloat about your victory over Florida last year. Leave my Wildcats out of it if it's not too much trouble.
Oh, I hear you. Hey, listen, we gloat about every win here for Vanderbilt football. We don't win that many.
That's true. That's true. The baseball team is the juggernaut to be for those who aren't up to date on SEC sports. It's the baseball team in Vanderbilt that's one of the best in the country. Although I guess it was LSU that won the national title this past year. Nonetheless, Willie, we digress. We brought you on to talk about the Nashville Predators and what has been a very interesting offseason in Nashville with the changing of the guard. David Poile no longer running the ship there. Dauphin, Manitoba's own Barry Trotz now in charge there. I guess from your perspective, before we get into the individual players and some of the moves that have been made, was it time for this change to happen?
I think it was. I was really hoping that last group could pull it out. They were able to sort of creep back in it unexpectedly down the stretch here. That would have been an amazing story to lose the guys that they did through injury and maybe sneak into the playoffs. But the Jets had something to say about that, and that was really something that Barry Trotz looked at. He said, you know what, that team probably got the absolute most out of what they could or what they had down the stretch, and it still wasn't good enough. So it was time to shake things up. So this organization has been pretty steady when you really go through the years. Only one general manager up until just a couple of months ago, only now 4 head coaches. So the shakeup, I think, was kind of a fresh start, and I think a lot of the fan base welcomed that.
Now, Willie, I wanted to get right into Ryan O'Reilly because you talked to him on your show. I think it was Thursday, if I'm not mistaken, and I haven't had a chance to listen to it, but I want to listen to it. And obviously, O'Reilly was the big signing, and we wanted to get your opinion on O'Reilly. Obviously, a former Conn Smythe winner with the St. Louis Blues. Obviously, didn't have the longest run with the Toronto Maple Leafs, but I don't speak for Drew or Dave, but it seems like Ryan O'Reilly up the middle was exactly what this Predators team needed.
Well, what Barry Trotz set out to do, and he pretty much said it before the free agency period started, when he made some pretty controversial moves to trade Ryan Johansson basically for half price and getting nothing in return for the most part, the expiring contract of Alex Galchenyuk, and then buying out Matt Duchene after not being able to trade him. That was showing that he wanted to clear the way for the young nucleus of players that a lot of you guys saw late in the season up in Winnipeg a couple of times, really. Luke Evangelista, Cody Glass from Winnipeg. and some of these other guys that got a chance to play. They showed some promise, but they wanted to make sure that those guys had room to grow. And quite honestly, Ryan Johansson and Matt Duchene just weren't playing up to $8 million players. And when you're making $8 million, you need to be driving the bus. So they wanted to shake that up a little bit. And Ryan O'Reilly was, in Barry Trotz's mind, I think the perfect type of guy that could sort of pave the way. He could support those guys and also be a really good influence on them, and also be versatile enough to look, if Cody Glass all of a sudden makes a big jump up into that number 1 center position or number 2 center position, and they get fortunate enough that way, Ryan O'Reilly's versatile enough that maybe he could slide down and still be a really effective player because he affects things all over the ice, whereas Johansson and Duchene are really straight up scorers.
Willie, we saw those Milwaukee Admirals 30 times in the last 2 years. We know plenty about the Nashville Predators farm team here in Manitoba. But, I want to ask you about a guy who may get to the Milwaukee Admirals one day, Aiden Fink. And I ask about him, of course, because he was the last selection by David Poile. So how significant was that? And it seems like Nashville might still be drafting because they had so many draft picks. I think they had like 15 this year, next year. I think they're still drafting right now. But how significant, how nice was it for him to kind of be able to end his tenure as GM in that way?
Well, it was kind of a running joke, right? Every time in the first round, a general manager would take the stage, they would give a little salute to David Poile. So that was a really nice touch. And then it ended that way with that trade for the final pick that David Poile would make for Fink. And, I don't know much about him. We saw him a little bit in the rookie camp that they had a little over last week. I think they like what they saw. They're optimistic really about the entire prospect pool because they've been able to really grow it. To David Poile's credit, even though this team has been kind of in a win now mode, he has been able to hang on to the first round pick. And so they have a pretty decent farm system, pretty deep farm system, and they hope it's only going to get better with all these draft picks. As you mentioned, they had 13 going into the draft and they used 11 of them. And one of the first things I heard about Fink is they had him rated higher than a 7th round pick. So we'll see what he turns into.
Willie Donick, our guest on the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, talking about the Nashville Predators radio. Willie is their radio play-by-play broadcaster. Willie, in the lead up to the draft and all the silly season in the NHL, the name that we heard a bunch was Yaroslav Askarov, the goaltender for the Predators. We know UC Saros is really one of the best goalies in the league on a very team-friendly contract, $5 million a year for the next 2 years, which will only make him 30 years old, so not really old, especially as it pertains to a goaltender. But Askarov seems like he's right on the cusp of demanding more NHL work, maybe as a starter. How does that sort of play itself out? Do you think that the trade rumors we heard with his name in it were real, or is Sorrow, or could you see maybe a changing of the guard over the next couple of years when it comes to goaltending in Nashville?
Well, you guys have just hit on probably the number one thing that gets talked about from the real diehard fans all the way down to the casual fans, because that's such a big thing is who the goalie is, right? And I think to answer part of your question first, and I do think that Barry Trotz went very aggressively. He said it. I mean, not often do you hear a general manager go on the record after the draft was over. He did not name Askarov by name, but he said he made an uncomfortable offer to try to get up into the top 3 or 5 picks to get what he thought was a really good crop of number 1 centermen he used specifically, or game-changing kind of guys. Mm-hmm. And so it was widely speculated that Askarov was in that mix of a package that he put forth there. And so that being said, they love their goaltending. I mean, UC Saros was outstanding last year. I think even underrated to a large extent, just because, Nashville is not in the spotlight a whole lot, hasn't been for the last couple of years. And he got hurt 2 years ago when they got into the playoffs, and he never got a chance to really showcase what he could do on the big stage. And they also got a huge year from Kevin Lankinen last year. He was outstanding in the games that he played. And if you look at his underlying stats, they were phenomenal. And he got some very tough starts. You guys know how it is as a backup. You get into that third game in 4 nights, or the back half of a back-to-back when the team's traveling on the road. And he really shined. So there's no rush for Askarov. You guys saw him a ton last year when he played for Milwaukee. You'll probably see him a lot this year because they still think that there's a lot of room to grow. He's so young. But that being said, I'm sure he's getting antsy, and there's all kinds of opinions that everybody has down here is, should you trade him and keep Saros and sign him to that next big contract? Mm-hmm. Or should you, as Saros gets closer to the end of this contract, trade him because in theory, that's when Askarov might be ready to jump in.
Shades of Luongo and Schneider back in the day in Vancouver. Hopefully, hopefully the Predators will at least end up with one of those two, unlike the Canucks.
Yeah, I do think that's logical. And look, they had Pecorine and UC Saros for about 4 years, and they had a tremendous tandem. Saros was very patient. He came into the league very young. I think he was 21 the first year he was really the backup. And so that was a long process before he graduated up to where he is. So there is a precedent there for keeping both as well. But I think a lot of fans are really wheeling and dealing. There's a lot of GMs that like to call radio shows.
Willie, we have to ask you about Nino Niederreiter because we were talking about Niederreiter before we had you on. And when that trade was made, first of all, just going back to last summer, I thought that was a great move for the Predators, signing Niederreiter for a couple of years. And when the Jets acquired him, I think a lot of people were surprised at the fact that the Jets didn't have to give up a roster player, especially considering he had 1 year left on his move. So I guess two-part question for you. Considering what I think, I can't remember if it was Barry Trotz or David Poile who actually pulled the trigger on the Tanner Jeannot, Nino Niederreiter trades, but considering what the Predators got for Jeannot, how surprised were you that the Jets acquired Niederreiter for only a second-round pick in 2024? And what stood out to you about Niederreiter in his time with the Predators? Because I can tell you that Jets fans love Niederreiter, even though he's only been a Jet for less than half a season. Fans are really excited to see what he can do in a full season next year for the Jets.
Well, you hit on the real turning point of the season last year. The team was on a long West Coast trip, and the Niederreiter trade was the first trade that signaled that the Predators were going in a totally different direction. They had a couple of guys hurt. Ryan Johansson had just been injured and was pretty much out for the season. The team was very up and down, still kind of looking at the playoff spot, but it was going to be a long shot. And so David Poile just said, okay, we're moving on. We're going to start trading off some veterans and seeing what we can get. So it was a very shocking move. It was particularly tough on the captain, Roman Josi, because Nino is one of his closest friends. He was the one that kind of coaxed Niederreiter to come to Nashville. And David Poile felt really bad about that part of it. But he felt like it was what he had to do. And honestly, that was also, if I remember correctly, about 24 to 48 hours before the Predators went public and announced that Barry Trotz was going to be the general manager in waiting. But he had been there, as we found out later, he had been around and been sort of, talking with David Poile and lockstep about what they thought was best. And that Tanner Jeannot deal happened a couple of days later. So it all started going on. And really, from that day forward, the Predators have been probably the busiest team in doing a makeover in the entire league. But Niederreiter is a great pro. You know exactly what you're getting from him. He's going to be consistent. At the end of the year, he's going to have his 20 goals, 25 goals. He's going to play hard-nosed hockey. He's going to do it with class. So it was tough to give him up. And I remember thinking, that's all they got for Niederreiter. But, hey, they did kind of make up for it because they got a lot more for Jeannot and obviously Matthias Ekholm and Mikhail Granlund to get rid of his contract. So they did pretty well when it was at the end of it. But it started with that Niederreiter deal.
Well, Willie, we want to ask you about, because we are a Manitoba-based show, so we have an obligation to ask about a Manitoban. Although with Nashville, we could ask about a lot of guys, but specifically Cody Glass. So you mentioned him in one of your early answers. What is the ceilings for Cody, and what is he seen as a potential? Is he a potential first liner, or how do they view him in Nashville? Because everybody watched that video when they said they were going to make him a full-time NHLer. You don't have a heart if it didn't tug at your heartstrings a little bit watching that and his reaction. But what is his sort of the vision for Cody Glass next season in Nashville?
Well, he's going to get a chance. I think he's earned it as well. If you look back, one of the things that Barry Trotz said about Cody Glass is it's been the long road. Like if you go back, one of the things he really pinpoints, and this was well before he became a Predator, when he was in Vegas, he had a really severe knee injury, and it was right during COVID. So you put those two things together, and it really slowed down his progress. It made it very tough, and he didn't recover for a while. And when the Predators picked him up in that three-way deal that involved Ryan Ellis, he was kind of a unknown. You weren't sure what you were going to get from him, and they ended up sending him down to Milwaukee for an entire season. So again, he spent a lot of time playing against the Moose, right? But that they really feel like that is when he regained some confidence. He got healthy. He improved when maybe the limelight wasn't on him. He wasn't playing under the pressure of being the 6th pick in the draft. And then even after that thing that you referenced in the early season special that they did on NHL Network, where he got very emotional, he still had a little while before he really picked it up. His first 15 or 20 games, he didn't do much. But if you really look at what he did in the last, say, 2/3 of the season, he made a big jump. So what's his ceiling? I don't know if he's a number 1 center. I think he could be a really solid number 2 on a winning team. I didn't think the floor would be very solid number 3 center, because I think he's very good in a two-way game. He's a great passer. But I'm really excited to see where he goes, because each year he's gotten better.
Willie, last question for you. The Predators subtract Ryan Johansson. They subtract Matt Duchene from their roster. They add in a guy like Ryan O'Reilly. They add in a guy like Luke Shen, guys who are clearly on the back end of their career, but are guys that have won a lot of the places they've gone. Good character guys, no disrespect to Johansson and Duchene, whose effort level might fluctuate from a game-to-game basis. Is Barry Trotz indicating with these moves and telegraphing the importance he's putting on character in the dressing room and on the ice when it comes to the Predators moving forward?
Yeah, and he's made no secret about that. He wanted a change. I don't know if it was as much Johansson and Duchene not being character guys, but They wanted to sort of shake it up. New coach, new general manager, a lot of young players coming in. And he did pay for that winning experience and that leadership quality. In fact, you could probably argue he overpaid, right? 3 years for Luke Shen, 4 years for Ryan O'Reilly. I think he probably had to go 4 to keep O'Reilly from going to, say, Toronto or maybe even back to St. Louis. Mm-hmm. But so maybe he paid a little extra. They had cleared enough cap space that they felt like they had it to spend. And so they want to keep that pathway clear for guys like Glass, Luke Evangelista, Juuso Parson, and others to sort of graduate up into bigger roles. And really, that's where they're going to sink or swim. You surround good leadership with the young players and see where you can go.
Ezra, you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, Willie. I've been a bit of a mess today. My computer conked out, and I'm at my wife's family's cottage out here, and then it started raining, so now I'm inside. So I apologize to everybody. This isn't my best hour, but
when he says today, he means the last 39 years. But either way, it's fine.
Yeah. That's exactly right, Drew. But Willie, I just wanted to ask you. I thought it was important to mention the draft, right? Because it was 3 weeks ago, and we were hoping that we could find a way to get to Nashville for the draft, but it didn't work out. All 3 of us have been to Nashville, and as you know, it's an incredible city. I hope to come back to Nashville one day, but we went to a Titans game, and just the history of country music, the people there. I have only great things to say about the city of Nashville and the people that live there. And just wanted to ask you, now that it's been 3 weeks, like it looked like the city and everybody just had the best time in Nashville. Obviously, it helped that you had some generational players, as you mentioned earlier, with Bedard, Carlson, Fantilli. But now that it's been 3 weeks, what are kind of your takeaways from that whole week in Nashville with the draft taking place there?
Well, it was great, and the only downside maybe because the Blackhawks had the first pick for Bedard, that a lot of their fans came down. But they got booed pretty rowdy by both sides. But they made their noise. They made their presence felt. But it was great. That Nashville has become a city where big events sort of seek them out now as a city. They had the NFL draft a couple years before. They had the NHL All-Star game. And so the reputation is starting to get there to where the bar is set high. So for locals, it's like, oh, good, you got another big event. So now it's like, what's next? Right now, the Titans are in the process of starting to build a new stadium that's going to have a roof on it, so they get access to something like the Super Bowl or the basketball Final Four, maybe even who knows, maybe a Frozen Four someday. So they love getting events like that. They know what they're doing. You get the musical angle to it. And it was funny. Some of the people that went up to the podium were referencing bar tabs at Tootsie's across the street from the arena. So there's no question that they partook.
No question about it at all. I think, that seemed why the second day went so quickly. I think people had reservations at tables up and down Broadway there to make sure that they were back, tipping the bar back a little bit. Willie Donick is the Predators play-by-play broadcaster on 102.5 The Game in Nashville. Willie, appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us this morning.
All right, guys, anytime. Enjoyed it.
Likewise. Take care, Willie. All the best. There he goes, Willie Donick, joining us this morning on the show. Always great to hear from Willie. And before him, great to hear from Rick Ralph, in case you missed either of those two interviews on today's program. They will be available on the YouTube immediate replay. They'll also be available on the podcast edition of the show, which will be up shortly after we sign off. Speaking of signing off, goodbye, Ginsburg. Don't message me for like 7 weeks. We'll see you in September.
What are you talking about, Drew? We're going to go to a Bombers game pretty soon. Let's not think that we're going to be getting rid of me that quickly. But yes, I'm going to be taking. Look, it's my birthday weekend next weekend, so I think I'm entitled to take that weekend off, and I have some vacation time coming off. So yep, this is my last show for the summer.
Vacation time? You've been paying into a vacation pay, and Dave and I haven't known about it.
No, vacation. I'm talking about Hockey Manitoba. I'm taking some time off.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's my 41st birthday next weekend, so I'm going to be back out here. I saw a few people asking. I don't live out in Lac du Bonnet, but this is, I think, the 4th straight weekend we've been out here, and why wouldn't we? It's beautiful out here, right? So yeah, it's my last show of the summer. Getting some time off. But as we've talked about, guys, with the kind of possibility that there could be another big trade involving Connor Hellebuyck or Mark Scheifele.
Yeah. We'll let you know about it in September.
Yeah, exactly. September's going to come very quickly, but I just want to quickly say thanks for everyone for watching all season long, including the post-game shows. I know Drew's probably going to be more articulate and eloquent when he signs off in a couple of weeks officially for the summer. But I'm excited to have some time off. I'll be honest. I'll get to spend these Saturday mornings a couple hours more with my kids. But thanks everybody for watching. It's been an incredible season, and we're looking forward to. We've got some exciting things coming, as I think we'll be talking about in the weeks to come. But definitely excited to have a little time off before September rolls around.
And there he goes, ladies and gentlemen. Good final words from Ezzy on this Saturday morning. He's shaking his head. Okay, sorry, I had to do that. I'll welcome you back.
That wasn't nice, Drew.
When have I ever been nice? I mean, come on, Dave. You had to know that something like that was coming. Nice and yours truly rarely go together. I say it with love. That's what people who oftentimes listen to this show might not understand, that every time that we stick the little knives into one another, it's done with love first and foremost. But Dave M and I will drive the bus home for the last couple of weeks here in July. And as I mentioned, 2 weeks from today, AMA, Ask Mindell, Minuk, anything. That's how we're going to wrap up the 2023 summer portion of the Illegal Curve Hockey Show before we come back for training camp. But you still got 2 weeks left of us, so you can't go anywhere just yet. All of you who've been watching us this morning, it's great to see so many familiar friends driving through the summer doldrums with us as we await some more news from the Winnipeg Jets. If it's going to happen, it will be brought to you on illegalcurve.com and here on the Illegal Curve YouTube channel. As I mentioned, a big thank you to Willie Donick, Nashville Predators play-by-play broadcaster. A big thank you to Rick Ralph for joining us for that great walk down memory lane. In case you missed any of it, it'll be available on the Illegal Curve podcast and the immediate replay on YouTube. A big thank you to all of our sponsors, Rumors Restaurant and Comedy Club. Tonight, his final night in town, Kevin Banner. Next week, Jordan Rock. That's Chris Rock's brother. Tickets available, rumorscomedyclub.com. Our friends at Linden Market Dental Dental Center, Grid Park, The Keg, Zappia Group Realty, Betway, Tough Duck, Boston Pizza, Seagram's, and of course, Rolly's Transfer. Support these fine businesses because of their continued support for Illegal Curve Hockey. We wish Ezzy nothing but the best for the remainder of the summer. Dave M and I will be here for the next couple weeks. If you haven't already done so, smash the like button, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast. Leave us feedback here, there, and everywhere. We always like to hear what you have to say about the Illegal Curve Hockey Show. Big thanks to everyone for joining us. Have a great rest of your weekend, whatever you're doing. Be safe while doing it. Until next Saturday at 9 a.m., we wish you nothing but the best. And if it's Saturday, it's the Illegal Curve Hockey Show, live on YouTube and all of our social media platforms.